Please welcome Chief Strategy Officer, TSA, Robert Rose.
Good morning, SDL Connect. Hi. The bird threw everybody off, right? Like the bird, like we made out with a bird, so it's like everybody's. It is so great to be here. I have been a fanboy, certainly, of SDL for many, many, many years, which shows a couple of things. One is that I'm old. And the second is that this company has been a sort of a classic leader in this market space for a long time. So I'm super glad to be here with all of you talking about all of the things having to do with content and experiences and everything that SDL stands for. To talk a little bit about intelligent content and what that means, and sort of in the context of what we're seeing anyway, in the way of how brands are looking at content and really struggling with it in some cases. And so I'll start with a little bit of a story here, which is in 2007, there was a guy by the name of Joshua Bell. And Joshua decided one day he was going to go down in the sort of the arcade area of the Washington, D.C. Metro and busk for a little bit. For 3.5 hours, actually, he sat and played violin. What the world didn't know when they started to see Joshua Bell play the violin was that he is a world-class virtuoso violinist, and with the symphony orchestra there. And he played for 3.5 hours, beautiful music, Bach. And he played all this wonderful music and nobody stopped. Basically, everybody went just hustling by in their sort of normal, everyday world and just can't be bothered to actually stop and listen to music being played that you would normally spend $150 to $250 a ticket for. And this story gets told, and the interesting thing that when this story gets told is we often talk about that, our hurried world, how fragmented we are, how inattentive we are to detail, and it's true. All of those things are certainly true in terms of the sort of moral of the story here and the experiment that Joshua is actually running here. To me, the interesting thing here is not the people who walk by. The interesting thing to me is the one woman who stopped. And the interesting thing is that research has shown that we see what we expect to see. We see excellence when we expect to see excellence. We see what makes us stop and pay attention and holds our attention because we expect it. And they've actually done research on this to say when we actually have set a pattern, when we've set a pattern in our brain to what we expect excellence to look like, what we expect something that will attract and hold our attention to look like, we will stop. And so the one woman who did stop understood, had the pattern set because she knew the music. She knew and had experienced the music before. And so when she sees Joshua Bell in the arcade playing outside of the Washington, D.C., she stops. And that to me is a fantastic metaphor for where we are in the communications of our business right now. In this fragmented world that we live in, we're trying to create these immersive experiences. We're trying to create all this wonderful content that will actually stop a customer, stop a prospect, stop someone, and have them get value out of that to the point where they'll actually want to have another. And that interests me very, very much because what it says is that the power of us to create these immersive experiences is truly the focus of our business. It's why many of you are here. It's certainly why we're in marketing and communications and all of the things that we do. And yet we struggle at it. We struggle with creating these immersive experiences. And why is it that we struggle with this? Is it because we're not playing music like Joshua Bell does? Is it because we're in a boring industry? Is it because No, it is none of those things, because all of the people that are out there are succeeding with this are doing so because they can actually do this. So what is it that they've done? What is it that they've actually changed? Well, it brings up another quick story here, which is about a guy, and you computer programmers in the room will appreciate this. A guy by the name of Melvin Conway, who in 1967 basically wrote what would become known as Conway's Law, which is that organizations that design system are constrained to produce designs which are copies of the communication structures of their organization. Basically, what he was saying would be rephrased much more simply by a guy by the name of Steven Sinofsky, who was then the president of Windows Division about a decade ago. He said, don't ship the org chart. And so this is our challenge today. Don't ship the org chart. How we are organized is how we are going to speak. You can see this. When you go to a website, maybe your own website, and you go and you see the different, and we have solutions that's managed by one team. We have the feature section managed by our product marketing. We have our PR section. We have our executive bios. Why in 2019 do we still need executive bios on our website? Why? Because that's the way we're organized. We are trained to communicate in the way that we are organized. Don't ship the org chart. Now here's the thing. When we hear this, don't ship the org chart, we are basically cautioned, as well as with Conway's Law, to say, you know what? We need to be conscious of this fact that we need to create experiences that don't reflect our organizational structure. And the challenge with that is not the idea of closing that gap. No, what Steven Sinofsky was saying, what Conway's Law says, is not that you can be conscious of not designing your customer experiences based on your organizational structure. They are saying it is inevitable. You are going to ship the org chart. You are going to create customer and communication experiences that reflect how you are organized. So it is not about reorganizing ourselves to be conscious of separating out this idea. It is reorganizing ourselves so that we are actually shipping something that is customer-centric and the idea of creating that value. Content, the way we create content, the way we manage it, the way that we use it in the business is the experience. It is what we do. And fascinatingly, in 2019, we still, in most businesses, haven't treated content as a strategic function in our business. I am of the firm belief that content should have the same level of strategic function as legal, as marketing, as PR, as sales, as accounting. And yet, we kind of don't. Content right now in most businesses is everybody's job and nobody's strategy. And this is where we are. How we create content, how well a business communicates is in direct correlation with how much effort it puts. We do research every year at the Content Marketing Institute, and this story just keeps continuing to come up. Because right now, strategic content for most businesses is stuck distinctly in average. When we look at, and we go out, and this year was our biggest survey ever, we went out to more than 5,000 people across the globe, across the world, and said, how are you handling strategic content right now in your business? Well, half of the organizations we talked to said we have a small group that services the entire company. It is not uncommon for me to go to a workshop or come to a conference like this, and someone will come up to me and they'll say, yeah, hi, my name is Bill, and this is my colleague Margaret, and we create content for, we're the content creators. We create all the infographics in the blog, and we create white papers, and we create it for sales, we create it for PR. The VP always wants a video of himself doing the social corporate responsibility thing, so we create that too, and then we create all this wonderful content, and how are we going to scale that? And I say, you're not. Stop trying. This is where we are. Half of us create the idea of content across the organization. Is it any wonder then that only 41% of the companies that we talk to have any kind of formal strategy for managing and using content at all, for any formal documented strategy for actually doing that? We can't have a formal strategy because there's only Bill and Margaret, and they're too busy creating an on-demand content vending machine for the rest of the organization. And then when we look at it, we say, what is the biggest challenge that you're having? 61% of those businesses said coordination among the silos. Basically, how do we move in between the functional silos to actually coordinate that and get content to be a unified idea there? How do we get rid of the duplication? How do we get rid of all of this stuff that we're doing for the various channels? How do we coordinate among all those people? So is it then any wonder that 57% said that they know or that they were unsure if they could actually measure ROI from the creation of content? By the way, if you are unsure, the answer is still no. And then when we flipped the chart and we said, what do successful content companies do? 90% of them that are successful say successful content marketers, content strategists are putting audience needs above all else and building immersive, wonderful experiences that actually drive subscribed audiences. That's what we're doing. And so the overlap there, when we start looking at the insights there, we can see that there is no actual operating business model for content in our business. So there is no purpose, there is no function, there is no strategy, and thus it means confusion on how much to create, where should we create it, how should we manage the channels, other than basically buckets of stuff that we just put more content into. And though the default for all of us in this content creation world is basically just a default to the one thing that we actually know how to do, which is to make the logo pop and create sales-oriented content and create more and more and more and more and more and more of it. We're creating so much content these days, and so much of it that we can't actually even get our arms around it any longer. When content works, it actually works, we have found, in one of 4 operating business models. This is the first step to understanding how we can actually get our arms around this challenge. The 4 business models are typically the player model. This is where we often start, and it's where often businesses really begin with content. This is where content emerges as sort of everybody's job and no one's strategy. This is where basically we all create content for various purposes. It is usually a departmental strategy focused in on internally focused campaign-oriented programs. So we have individual assets getting created. We have all of this wonderful stuff in the DAM system. Nobody goes into the DAM system, by the way. Everybody thinks they go into the DAM system. We're at the water cooler and somebody goes, hey, did you see that awesome new thing that I created? No, well, it's in the DAM system. Why aren't you looking in there? No, we set up email campaigns to our sales guys to say, go look in the DAM system. And so maybe some of us evolve and we start building in what's called the performer model. The performer model is where we actually start looking to build audiences through separate publications. So we might call it a blog, we might call it a resource center, we might call it a digital asset center, we might call it all these wonderful things, but we're building audiences, engaged audiences through these ideas, and we're building it as a team, content as a department. Then in the lower right, we have what we call content as processor. This is where content as a service lives, where we start creating services like translation, localization, globalization, the idea of guidelines, SEO, structured content, where no content may be created at all with this team, but the team exists to make content better. It is an integrated strategy typically, but it is still really only focused on internally focused issues. We're trying to make our content better for us and tag it as such. And then finally, there's content as platform. This is where content itself can become its own business model, where content itself becomes a division, becomes a separate idea. In many cases these days, content as a revenue center. And this isn't just relegated to the big businesses like the Red Bulls of the world and those kinds of companies. There are small companies making stages with this as well. So when it works well, it's working as usually one or multiples of this particular model. The idea here is to create whatever is appropriate for us and understand our operating model as it pertains to all 4 of these, to create an integrated set of operating functions, a strategy, a team that focuses in on how to deliver a portfolio of immersive experiences that match our business strategy. That's the importance of this, because when we start looking at this, we can see examples of this and we can start seeing how it will work much better together. So for example, an example of the performer model. This is Monster.com job board. They're doing very, very well these days. And what they've decided to do was they created an experience that was going to drive and build an audience for their marketing and communications needs. So they built what they call their Career Advice Center. And they spent 18 months building their Career Advice Center. And they built this as a separate group. There is a team that focuses in on this. They are actually merchandising content back into PR and corporate communications and all of the things that they're doing. But this becomes their immersive experience for how you experience the Monster brand. And a little later, I'll tell you about some of the results that they got. Then there's the platform model. The platform model is where we actually have business as content as a completely separate business and organization. I love this example so much. This is Arrow Electronics. And Arrow Electronics is, I think, Fortune 20 or something like that. They are a very large electronics manufacturer distribution organization that focuses in on electrical engineers, as you might expect, as the way that they sell stuff. They have spent the last 18 months purchasing every website, journal, magazine, and email newsletter in their business. They now own 53 magazines, websites, journals, and email newsletters. If you says, who's the biggest media company for electrical engineers? It's not a media company, it's Arrow Electronics. Now, why would they do that? Well, what they noticed is that they started to see that their audience were losing their resources. Things like IEEE magazine and those sorts of things, EE Times. And they were losing those magazines because the publishers were letting those magazines fall because they were a little bit unprofitable, and so they're just getting rid of them as part of their portfolio. So Arrow said, that's a very interesting thing because we understand our audience very, very well. And where do electrical engineers get 100% of their post-university education? Websites, email, newsletters, journals, and magazines. And they said for what ultimately amounts to a rounding error in the delta between profitability and making money, we can actually take this over and become the thought leader, become the media engine, the content engine, the immersive experiences for our electrical engineer audiences. As Victor Gao, the guy who runs that program, says to me, he says, we're not competing with our competitors for this program. We have many, many other marketing communications programs for that. We created a separate team and a strategy for this because we're competing against accounting. We're competing against mathematics. We're competing against college professorships. We're competing against everything that might prevent electrical engineers from being inspired to create new stuff. So we're maintaining our TAM, our total addressable market, by increasing that by basically creating ourselves as the most and biggest media organization. And, by the way, the data riches that come with that, by understanding their competitive market set, because they're still selling advertising and booths and all that stuff to their competitors. Understanding the audience insight, understanding what their electrical engineering audiences and customers care about, giving themselves the ability to be a much more insightful organization. Then there's the processor model. What Carlos Abler, who's actually just left 3M, did over the last 5 years was to build a complete business unit organized around creating the standards, guidelines, and platforms for how content would be managed at 3M. And what he did was he basically created all the SEO guidelines, translation guidelines, globalization guidelines, workflows. He wasn't there to create content for the business. He was there to create all of the standards and accounting guidelines, if you will, for how content should be managed in all the different business units and all the different regions, et cetera. So he was creating all these playbooks, all this training, all this idea, so that he knew he wasn't going to be able to manage all the content across all those different silos, but what he was going to be able to do was create a wonderful integrated business strategy so that all the content that was getting created in a uniform and consistent way. The operating model is really important, and it's the one place that we haven't really focused as businesses yet, is on figuring out what is our purpose, what is the portfolio of immersive experiences that we want to manage, and how will we build a team to actually manage that, because that will help us determine what the governance framework should look like. What should our technology look like? How should our content be structured? How should it be tagged? How should it be utilized and as part of a scalable operation? The idea of centralized versus distributed idea is a false choice. We can actually determine what that choice should be optimal to our business needs. And that, in turn, develops our ability to create these immersive experiences and measure them accordingly. And so when we look at kind of an intelligent content framework, we can say this operating model gives us the ability to create the idea, to ideate, create, transcreate, optimize, basically create the team and the structures that are going to enable us to manage, create, and optimize content to its fullest extent, because that gives us the ability to create an intelligent content platform, which allows us to create content that's aware and organized and structured and intentional, and all of those wonderful things that an intelligent content framework will do. By the way, there's a wonderful white paper that SDL has created on this idea of what intelligent content and the framework of it looks like. If you have not downloaded and read that, it's a wonderful, wonderful piece. And that gives us the ability to then measure, connect those experiences to something that gives us the ability to look at the customers that are consuming that content and assign them different goals based on what happens to that particular customer, that particular audience. So let's look at some of that. Let's look at that governance model, because if we figure out which our operating model should be, then we can look at what governance model might make sense for our particular business. When we look at it out there, we see a couple of different things happening. One is this idea of a distributed model. And this is, again, the most common. I call this a little bit of this is the Oprah Winfrey of content strategies, right? You get a content, you get a content strategy, you get everybody. There's a content strategy underneath your chair right now if you just reach under there. And so when we look at that distributed model, this is the siloed model, but it can work. We see this in businesses all the time. It might be one or two per people in each group that are managing sort of the content strategy in a product group or in the PR and corporate communications group or something like that. And when it's working, it's highly entrepreneurial. When those groups are working, it is really working well because it's fast, it's agile, it works quickly. When it's dysfunctional, and it often is, this is the part where it doesn't scale very well. It doesn't work very well for some of those other parts of the business. For example, I worked with a credit card company, very large credit card company, retail bank. They have 7 different business units, in fact, in this retail bank. Credit card, their consumer credit card, which most of you probably have at least one of their credit cards in your pocket. basically, they have created this idea where that is what they're known for. But they also have retail banking. They also have home loans. They've got car loans. They've got all these other business units. But each silo has their own content strategy. Each silo develops their own persona. Each silo, and of course the consumer credit card, which gets all the marketing money, gets all the communications money, is doing great. They've got publications. They've got all these wonderful things. But the retail bank, they can't afford to do persona development. They can't afford to do audience development, even though they're talking to the same people. I talked to 2 of the product marketers in that organization, and they were sitting right in front of me, the small business head of product and the consumer card head of product, and they looked at me and I said, hey, wouldn't it be cool, because I said, I have both cards. I have a small business card and I have your consumer card. Wouldn't it be cool if you guys actually created some content that was together and you could actually share the audiences between your database? And they're furiously writing this down, and I'm like, no, I'm not the guy who should be telling you this. You should know this. But there they were. They were siloed. All of their customers were siloed off. All of their marketing opportunities were siloed off, and they couldn't talk to each other because they were so spread out in this distributed model. But it can work. It can work if this is the way that you want to construct it based on the operating model. Then there's the centralized model. The centralized model can work as well. This is where we create content as a department. We focus in on building audiences. We focus in on having this department, this group, this team function and merchandise content back into the rest of the organization. And when it works, there's a high degree of control here, a high degree of management idea, a high degree of editorial platform control and tone and consistency and all of that. Now, when it's dysfunctional, it has just as much risk of becoming yet another silo that we have to manage against. I worked with a huge technology company here in the Valley. And the idea of this huge technology company that they were creating all this wonderful thing, and they'd created a distinct team, a centralized model for how they were going to manage content. And this wonderful content team, they one day discovered that the whole organization had pivoted away from what they do, and they didn't even realize. They woke up one day and went, oh shit, we got left behind. And so they were left behind. They were ultimately disbanded as a team because, quite frankly, they didn't keep up with what the rest of the organization was doing. And so the model that we like the best, the one that we see working, and is quite frankly the hardest one to create, is this integrated idea, this integrated model, where content becomes all parts of the 4 operating models fabric of the business, where content is governed, content is maybe centrally governed, but created at the edges, as close to the customer as possible. And when this is functional, it really, really works. Because you've got subject matter experts, you've got people in the rest of the organization, you've got people who are close to the customer creating the content, but governed by a simple and strong and functional and structured idea. When this idea is dysfunctional, quite frankly, it's difficult to really figure out where things are. Politics gets in the way. This is the one model where culture eats strategy for breakfast so often, where we see all sorts of organizations struggling with this idea because we're going to now tell the subject matter experts on how to create content and how it's going to work and how it's going to be structured and how the intake form is going to work and all of that's we're going to tell them how it's going to be governed. They are going to create it, but they don't get to do it their way anymore. And my answer to that is, well, I don't get to just open up QuickBooks and figure out how I'm going to do my accounting spreadsheet for the accounting people. I don't get to figure out my own Excel, sort of ways of doing procurement things. No, I conform to corporate an idea of company-wide standards. That's the idea. Regardless of which idea you choose, operating model into a governance structure, the responsibilities of this team become 4-fold. One is some level of content creation management, where it's the approval of, the creation of, and organizing and managing the content for these content-driven experiences. 2 will be merchandising content, figuring out how we create content proactively so that it can be merchandised into the rest of the business. 3, internal activation and participation. This may be the most important thing. Internal activation and participation, making sure the rest of the organization understands how and why and the ways that we create content and gets everybody excited about it so that we're not routing around the institution and getting stuff done with freelancers and agencies and going rogue. And then 4th, measurement and insight, creating a common way to measure and get insight around all of those experiences that we're managing from a corporate idea. These become the 4 sets of responsibilities. I'll give you one example of this. This is a big software company that has just been acquired, and this is sort of the journey that they went through. They started And they evolved into this idea of what they called a content center of excellence. And they said, we're going to do this idea of sort of merging together all of the different operating models and the teams that we have together to start to manage content and create content in a really singular, focused way. And so they created this idea of a council, an editorial board, a content center of excellence. And out of that, they said this group, this team, will be responsible for managing 3 major initiatives. We will be responsible. We will push the buttons. We will create the experiences and the structure for these 3 major initiatives. And we will spend 60% of our efforts and time and budget here. And it was for this new business, small business initiative that they had going on. One was the resource center, and the third was the website. And this is with the services that they would actually perform under these integrated operating models with a lead one sort of in each category. Then they said, great, but we understand that that's not all the content that's going to be needed for across the enterprise. And so 30% of our time, budget, team bandwidth, et cetera, is going to be spent on this merchandising idea, where we will merchandise structured content into the rest of the organization, sales and e-commerce and customer service and HR and all the places that need the content. And they will use it for their own purposes. They'll use it for campaigns. They'll use it to put on microsites. They'll put it on landing pages. They'll put it on all the places that they actually need it. And then, so that's 90%. And then the rest of the 10% was what they called their ad hoc editing services, sort of headroom for their team to operate. And this was basically a creation of what they said was, we need basically a headroom to operate, but we also know that there's going to be stuff that we can't account for. That VP is going to come in and want that social corporate responsibility video, and we're going to have to do it. And so they can account for those ad hoc things. And then finally, once we have the governance schedule in place, we can start to think about how does this provide return on an investment on these immersive, intelligent experiences. And what we find is that, and you'll find I'm a sucker for alliteration here, we find 5 C's of measurement value that we can certainly start to structure in once we have these infrastructures in place. 1 is contribution. This is the earliest and most frequent way that we can actually measure the effectiveness and efficacy of our content teams. 2, campaign-oriented value, typically one of the most frequently used idea of metrics. 3, competency. How can we become a more competent organization based on our creation and impact on the audiences that we have? 4, customer value. How do we teach our customers to be better, more valuable, longer-term customers? And finally, cash. Can we actually generate content that generates revenue and is a profit center for our organization? Maybe the most of the outliers for many of your businesses, but certainly not too much of an outlier these days because it's really happening. And so let's look at each of these really quickly, and I'll give you an example. Because here's the thing. When done well, these build upon each other. They build upon each other, making the audience more and more and more valuable over time. So the contribution value. When we look at the efficacy and usage of content because it now has an operating and a governance and a structured model behind it. One of the biggest mistakes I see companies making with content marketing as a strategy is what we do is that Bill and Margaret produce assets, and they give that asset to a demand generation person, and that asset goes off to the demand generation purpose. And what happens? It gets measured, the value of that content gets measured on how well the demand generation team promotes that white paper. So we see the value of a white paper that they might have spent thousands of dollars on gets solely valued based on how well it did in a social promoted campaign or a social Google ad campaign or as promoted as part of a webinar. And that's not fair. It's not fair to the white paper. It's certainly not fair to the team that created the white paper, and it's not even fair to the demand generation person. We need to stop measuring by our ability to promote content and instead look at the value of content based on the long-term value of an asset created called an audience. So, how that contribution might help? Well, we might look at, quite frankly, the efficiency. One of the biggest benefits that we see in creating the operating model and the structure model has nothing to do with more leads or better leads or the Glengarry leads. It has everything to do with getting our arms around the costs of content. We worked with one global organization not too long ago where all we did was we said, print out everything that you spend across the world on content. And they printed out, it was 45 pages. Because in EMEA, an ebook is one thing, but in APAC, an ebook is quite something else. And it's called an article. And in this one's called a white paper. And what's a thought leadership paper? And what's a blog post? And what's another article? And what's a deep thought leadership article? And what is an infographic versus an ebook? But an ebook that is an infographic. 45 pages of cost. They could not get their hands around what an apples to apples cost comparison in each region looked like because everybody called stuff different things. So simply just getting our arms around the nomenclature and getting a standard in place for what they should be spending enabled them to reduce the number of agencies, find the number of agencies that were producing things at a much more effective rate, and quite frankly, save them a couple of $100,000 every quarter in all this waste of content that's getting created by different areas. Contribution goals. Second, or looking at an example of this, a company called SecureWorks. They're a cybersecurity company, smallish company, doing very well, and they created what they wanted to create was a sort of integrated idea of content and thought leadership for 3 different audiences, executives, as well as journalists, as well as consumers on what was going on in the world of cybersecurity. And the reason they did it wasn't to drive more leads, of course, although it was, but the idea was how do we create content that helps us understand how these people behave and what they care about? And so by segmenting these audiences and tagging the content accordingly, they basically looked at it and said, let's map the entire buyer's journey by using the idea of measuring where the content is consumed, how it's consumed, and who consumes it. That gave them the idea of a competency value to give them the ability to double their conversion rates by optimizing content and calls to action to the various different audiences. Learning what it is that they're doing that's working versus not by being able to look at the entire view. One of the simplest things, can we connect the experience of our blog, which might be run on a completely separate CMS? Can we completely look at the connection between the consumption of content on our website or our consumer resource center or anything like that? How do we start tying those experiences together? Campaign-oriented value. Yes, of course, the Glengarry leads, more, faster leads, better SEO, organic traffic, higher shopping cart value for those of you in e-commerce. This will bring back the Monster example because these guys just absolutely did wonderful things here by creating this immersive experience, structured experience, I might add, how they're managing this wonderful career advice center here. They're not only supporting by merchandising content into PR and corporate communications through original research that they're creating that's helping them get articles and coverage in Fast Company and Inc. and all of that. So helping out and merchandising content into PR and corporate communications. Now the content that they're creating for that represents 20% of all their organic traffic. They're creating a 20% of all their organic traffic comes through there, resulting in 4 million new job searches, which basically created 48,000 new members of their audience. And of course, that's their moneymaker, is creating new audience members. They've estimated that they were going to go spend that money to actually create that on paid media to get those 48,000 people. They would have spent $3 million. Did they spend $3 million to create the Career Advice Center? No. That delta is the value of what Career Advice Center is providing. Competency value. Can you become a smarter, faster, better organization by using content? Media buy effectiveness. One of the things of developing powerful immersive experiences that add value is that we're treating prospective customers as customers. For those of you who are thinking about CCPA or GDPR or all of the different data and privacy things, creating valuable, customer-driven immersive experiences that deliver value is one of the best ways to not only comply, but to actually design systems that are in the spirit of what those regulations and compliance procedures are all about, which is about creating value, creating a reason for someone to subscribe to our content, to our media, and to have that experience. We can use that data to actually draw more targeted ads. The idea of more optimized ads, to draw in personalization, to use that data to actually create a better experience for our customers. Even just something simple as marketing data improvement. One of the questions I'll ask a CFO one time is, tell me about your marketing database. Well, we have 25,000 in it. Great. Is it like give me the damn white paper at gmail.com? Because that's me, by the way. If you see that entry in your database, give me the damn white paper at Gmail. That's me, right? But is it that? Or are we actually creating first name, last name, title, what I'm interested in, valuable data? We call this emotional data, data that's given willingly, giving trustingly. That's more accurate, and it's going to serve you better, making us a better, smarter, faster organization. One of my favorite examples of this is the immersive experience that Johnson & Johnson creates called BabyCenter.com. And maybe you knew that Johnson & Johnson owns BabyCenter.com. Maybe you don't. They do. And they use this site to reach 48 million moms and dads every single month across the world. And so they know what moms in Spain think versus moms in northeastern Ohio. They know that moms plan their baby's first birthday at 10 months. That's invaluable information for a brand manager that's looking to roll out a new campaign. They use all of the data from the calculators, from the data that they're collecting, all of it GDPR compliant because they're creating customers. They're creating subscribers. They're creating a separate idea of an immersive experience that connects these ideas together to the data that's being generated from it. Now they're starting to create things like the idea of panels, where they're creating using some of their most valuable audience members to create consumer panels to actually inform them. So they no longer have to go out and recruit focus groups anymore because they have a 48 million strong focus group that they can draw from and build their own focus groups, digitally, virtual, as well as in person, using data to understand global audiences. Customer value, looking at customer, higher retention, higher net promoter score, using an experience to actually draw in better word of mouth, better ideas, better value. How can we start to utilize customer data and customer content experiences to do that? One of my favorite examples of this is TD Ameritrade, wonderful bank as well as on the institutional side. They created a print magazine that actually is this Think Money magazine that they got in an acquisition. And they were going to kill that print magazine. And the VP of marketing said, no, let's not kill it yet. Let's start sending it to customers. We'll start sending it to customers after they sign up for our TD Ameritrade trading platform. Fun fact, if you sign up for TD Ameritrade's trading platform, your average trading velocity is 1 time per week. After you start receiving this magazine, Think Money magazine, your trading velocity goes up to 5 times per week. So they quintupled their trading velocity with their customers by teaching them to be better customers. They're now taking the structured content that they create in Think Money magazine and applying it to their ticker tape blog, which sits at the top of the funnel and actually teaches new customers how to be customers. So they're actually reusing that content across multiple areas that they're actually using to drive value for not only prospective new customers, but existing customers who sign up. And then finally, cash. Finally, cash. This is not necessarily sort of the only, one of the biggest ones in the planet will actually happen up in San Francisco not too long from now, Dreamforce. Dreamforce alone will attract 175,000 people to San Francisco. It is a cash-bearing, it is estimated alone, if you were just to pull out Dreamforce out of Salesforce, it would be worth $1 billion. They're creating an asset by creating an immersive customer experience. But the revenue opportunities there are interesting, but they may offset costs on marketing. They may also provide you with interesting partnership opportunities. Weird fun fact, you're actually sitting in one now, which is a kind of an interesting, ironic thing. But here's a fun thing. This is a wonderful company called Terminus, and they make account-based marketing software. And they started, very small company, and they said, we're going to create a content brand, and we're going to structure all this content together to create this content brand. So they started with a podcast, and they launched a blog, and then they launched an event. And they launched it all around this wonderful content brand called Flip My Funnel. And the Flip My Funnel brand has become very valuable, to the extent that the events that they're creating are now paying for themselves because they have sponsors, their competitors in many cases, sponsoring the event to reach that audience. They actually have saved $1.5 million to hold that customer event, which got them 600 customers to attend that event, and to date 100 new customers who attended the event and got value out of the event, and it was a lead generation for them. But it also gave them the ability to understand competitive as well as top issues from some of their competitors because, of course, they were there. They could speak to them and they could watch what they're doing. It's also a customer loyalty event, a teaching event, teaching customers how to be better customers. And finally, they've gotten so much value out of this that investors are now coming to Terminus and saying, hey, we'll actually invest in just the Flip My Funnel content brand. So they've now split the company into 2 companies, which is one, the Flip My Funnel content media company, and the other company, which is, of course, the Terminus software company, reorganizing themselves around this idea. This is where we are. And we can actually do this. We can actually structure this if we understand what the operating model is. We can understand what this, if the operating model is. And now what I'd love to do is give you one other example. We have the benefit of having someone here in the audience today who just really is doing a great job at this. And so the wonderful thing about this, and I'm not checking my email, I promise, I'm just opening up my notes here. We can see what's happening across the spectrum. We've seen this with clients that we work with. We've seen this across the spectrum at the events that we hold. And we certainly see it in some of the things that we just observe out there. One of the brands that's really doing an amazing job at this, probably a brand that understands content and immersive experiences better than most, is the Disney company. And the Disney company is just doing an incredible job. And so as part of this, one of the things that we wanted to do was sort of bring someone up from the Disney organization to talk a little bit about this, their journey on how they're using intelligent content to build wonderful experiences. So Viru Talur is he's a leader in technology in Disney. He is working on the content management side of things. He is building these experiences, these integrated experiences for the Disney organization. And it is with great pleasure, and I'd love for you to give him a hand. I'm going to invite him up here on stage, and we'll have a little bit of a Q&A to finish out our keynote this morning. Blue? So, was that all right? Was that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Did it match kind of well with what you think? Okay, good. That's always a good thing. So I've heard rumors that Disney kind of cares about its brand a little bit. I don't know if that's true or not.
Yeah.
A little bit?
Probably.
Okay, good. One of the things that I think that we often look at when we think about the brand and how we create these immersive experiences and scale them across an organization like Disney is how do we start that transformation? So can you speak a little bit to the idea? I mean, I'm sure brand played a lot into it, and tone and consistency and getting sort of the idea of content just right. But can you speak a little bit to how you guys started? What was the sort of inspiration for this transformation, and how did it sort of start to take seed in terms of how you were going to reorganize to do this kind of stuff?
Yeah. I mean, I don't have to tell much about Disney. Many of you have visited, and you know very well what we do. So it is the place on the earth, a most magical place, right? Creating happiness through magical experience is the mantra for all of us. So it is very important for us to protect the brand while creating these innovative solutions for the better guest experiences. So when it comes to the content, over a period of time, as you all know, Disney sells a lot of products and services in different areas, into the parks, merchandise, resorts, hotels, restaurants. So there is a lot of wide variety of products and services that Disney offers in the market. And these products and services are kind of supported and managed by different business units within the organization. So over a period of time, as time progresses, they started building their own silos of tools to build and manage this content and information. So basically, each tower or business unit have their own kind of little siloed content that is in place, and they start managing. But what happens is that poses some of the problems, such as the content is duplicated many times, and a lot of content is shared across. Like the resort in Disneyland, the resort in Walt Disney World probably share the similar policies or similar information, similar check-in process and all that stuff, right? A lot of content can be shared and reused. Not only structure, but the content itself can be shared, like the parking rules or whatever, right? So the challenges were not only duplicating the content, adding the cost to the whole overall content management process, but also how do we make the content in sync, right? And how do we deliver this content to various channels like mobiles, websites, the in-room experiences, the websites are like guest-facing, guest-facing. So there is so many, omni-channel experience that we need to cover, right? So it's very hard to keep the content in sync and deliver the content through various channels, maintaining the brand consistency, right? So all of these challenges inspired us to get together, and as a team, we formed a small group within the Disney organization as we call content management team. I cannot disclose the real name, but treat it as content management team for Disney Parks and Resort, right? So we identified different systems where the content is stored in silos, and then we identified the content or analyzed the content in terms of what is the type of content, and we segregated them, like obviously what is the shared content, what is very business unit specific content. So we were able to come up with a solution where we can manage all this content in a centralized platform. Obviously, we chose SDL Tridian as the centralized platform, and we were able to bring all the reusable content as a shared publication or whatever called in Tridian, and also provision for brand or business unit specific content within the same system. So how it helped us is that we were able to not only maintain all the content in one system, but we were able to put some governance around the content, because now all the content is one single place. So you can set up a governance process like Robert was talking about a few minutes ago, so that it is an overarching team who can take care of the processes, legal aspects, and strategic content related information and publishing and delivering the content. So which really helped us in terms of not only saving and controlling the cost, but to deliver the right content to the right customer quickly and appropriate time. So the key here is having a vision and creating the centralized platform really helped us ultimately to protect the brand itself and delivering the consistent message across various channels.
One of the things that I found when I was doing some of the research and talking with some of the folks at SDL about your journey here, which is this idea that you guys have of this single source of the truth, this idea of there is a single source of truth for the content that's going to live and in the system, and you've been able to manage that change. Can you talk a little bit about how today content is managed given that single source of the truth, and if there was any was there pushback and from a cultural standpoint, from a process standpoint, from a workflow standpoint, or was it how did you roll that out?
Yeah, I mean, it's not an easy task, right? When you have multiple teams to work with and you have to coordinate with all of them and make sure there is a vision that is exposed to all the leadership, because sometimes these business units are controlled by different towers or pillars by different leadership, right? So we want to make sure that it is communicated to all the leaders and brought leaders on board first before we start anything with the idea. So one of the things is translations, right? So Disney is global, as we all know, and guests visit from all over the world to visit the parks, resorts, and theme parks and cruise line and everything, right? So we wanted to create more magical experiences for them, right? As we speak about global, would it be cool when the guest enters into a resort and give you a personalized message on the screen or something in the language they speak? How cool would that be, right? These are some of the small things where you can do but create a big impact. It's not hard. There's not really quite innovative there, but just the idea itself will have a huge, long-lasting impact on the guest experience. So, as we talked about, we used to have the silos of this content, and during the process, to deliver all the content to all these channels and markets, global markets, we have to have the translations ability, right? So different systems gone into different mechanisms to translate the content, and different business units like different translation engines that ended up having multiple translation engines and then multiple mechanisms to translate, right? And obviously there's a challenge to deliver all this content to the guest at the right time to all these channels. So one of the use case was don't laugh. We translated some content on the fly at the page level, which is not the best experience for the guest, right? So to solve all these problems, consolidating the content management really solved 50% of our problem, because now you have all the centralized place where you can find the information in English. Now all you have to do is how do you translate it, right? So we hooked up with SDL translation solution, which is World Server, which is seamless integration, which many of you know probably would be using it too. And then as we put the governance process, it also helped to have the groups and roles created to manage different brand content for different markets. That really set up the streamlined process as well on that. And also as I said, we have multiple memories in different translation systems. So we were able to gather all the memory in one system into SDL World Server, and we were able to leverage all the memory that we have been building up over a period of time. So we did not lose much. In fact, we are gaining a lot of memory bank that can be leveraged for different products and projects going forward. So this not only reduced the overall cost, right, but also helped us to have a centralized place where we can manage the content and have the consistency across the content that we deliver, and at the same time, quick time to market. Because one way it is quick time to market, and sometimes we have to deliver the content at the same time to multiple channels. So having all in one place really helped business to really manage and translate with not much problem, and then deliver the content to the various channels that we support at Disney.
Did that, just a follow-up to that, one of the things that we found is that when you put in that level of sort of process, right, is that it can make it feel slower, right, in terms of especially at the front end. Did you find that there was some pushback from people saying, okay, this is going to slow things down, and gosh, that's a whole lot of process that you're talking about here, or did it, was it made up on the backside of things when you could reuse stuff, or?
So actually, our story is the opposite to what you thought. So it actually helped business quite a bit, and they really allowed it. The reason is Disney is huge. There is so many applications that we support. Along the way, between content management and content delivery to the website or mobile or in-room TV, there's a lot of layers in between. So everybody has a piece of pie to make code change or do something to get the content out the door from CMA into the targeted system. So by streamlining this process, we cut down a lot of those middle layers and cache layers, so which help to quickly market the content and reducing the number of layers. When you have an issue, it is easy to troubleshoot in 1 or 2 systems versus 15 layers. You know, we all know as a developers, it's how hard it is to troubleshoot, right? And coming to the content control or content change management process on the content side, you know, back in the days, you know, the content is very static, and we put it in the content, our code, and publish it out, not publish, deploy, or, you know, go through the change management process, which takes a lot of time, as we all know, and a lot of money either, right? So that's over a period of time with the evolution of content management systems, that is not a problem anymore. But right now and in future, the content is very dynamic, personalized, and mostly content-driven experiences. So we have to get the content built quickly and delivered quickly at the right time to the right guest, right? Which is very important to create these experiences. So one of the things is, like, you know, to get this content quickly out the door, still maintain the consistency and brand, protecting the brand. What we did was, like, you know, we evaluated the content, we segregated we categorized the content in kind of different buckets, like strategic versus non-strategic. So non-strategic is normal content. How do you describe a Magic Kingdom, or how do you describe a small world attraction, right? So those are pretty straightforward. There's not much legal involved. There's not much, you know, time sensitivity. So that can go with the normal publishing process with a set of approval groups or published groups, which is all fine. But the challenge is, how do you get the strategic content out? Usually strategic content is when like Disney is launching Star Wars or Pandora. So there's a lot goes into it. You know, there's a lot of teams that have to work together. So it is very time sensitive too. So how do we get this done, right? So we cannot simply ignore the change management or control around the content. At the same time, we cannot put a lot of control around so that it delays the whole process, right? So for the strategic content, what we came up with was that we implemented some system level checks and balances and workflows where, you know, the content is properly going through different teams that are appropriate to create, you know, approve or publish. And at the same time, we set up a process across the teams which are involved in the whole strategic content launch to work better in terms of, you know, how, when content is created, how you notify somebody else. When you are ready to publish to a mobile, how you communicate to the mobile team or website team or whoever, right? So having those two sets of things, you know, streamlined and process set up, you know, it really helped us to kind of get best out of both worlds, right? So we have some control over the content and governance. At the same time, you know, we were able to deliver the content at the right time and quickly when we have the strategic launches.
With so much change, I mean, that's a lot of change. Yeah. And I think one of the most remarkable things, you know, we see this all the time when we, you know, when content management solutions, translation solutions, you know, the whole sort of, you know, underpinnings, the sort of foundational technology gets put into a lot of enterprises, the tendency is to want to say, well, we have these unique requirements, and so we have these unique things, and so we're going to customize, which, you know, can blow upgrade path and can do all these, you know, not necessarily great things that sort of slow things down. But I think what's one of the remarkable things that I heard that I'd love for you to speak to is this idea that you guys really didn't go outside the bounds, right? You guys sort of said, this is what the software does, so we're going to reorganize ourselves around that rather than try and create these customizations. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, sure. So in today's business, you know, organizations are coming up with very creative ways to build their products and services and obviously make most revenue out of it, right? So, but technology has to keep up with that. So technology has to support those, you know, in this case, building the content and delivering the content to multiple channels. And sometimes to have these creative products created, you have to kind of, you know, accommodate in your system that you are supporting. So basically, you know, when we get a requirement, sometimes, you know, we let me step back, right? So in the past, right, when we have a legacy content management system we call, I don't want to name it, so we account for each and every business requirements that organizations or business units bring to us. We just say, oh, business wanted this, oh, let's build this. Oh, business wanted this. Oh, we cannot build this easy, but we can customize this or whatever, right? So along the process, we customize the product so much, we ended up in a situation where we cannot upgrade the product, we cannot migrate it to cloud, and obviously we cannot take advantage of the new features that are offered in the future versions, right? So it's a dangerous situation. It's not a comfortable situation where we wanted to be in, right? So along this process of centralizing the content and streamlining the whole process and delivery things, we decided that, let us set some team roles, Let's not say yes to everything. Doesn't mean that say no to everything, but evaluate each and every requirement that we get from the business units, right? It is very important that business teams and technology teams work very closely here, because without the proper good relationship and trust, it is very hard to have those conversations, because as a business user, I want this feature, right? But as a technology team, we say, oh yeah, it's hard, it is not out of the box. We need to do a lot of customizations. We need to spend time, whatever. So we need to work, business and technology has to work very closely together, and technology teams have to understand the requirement better and analyze the requirement first, right? So do we really need to do it, right? So if it has to be done, but it is not, well, if it is doable, we try to do it out of the box way first. There is no other way. Just say, hey, this is how you do it, and it is out of the box, easy to maintain, no problems in future. But if it is not available out of the box, but still need some customizations to implement it, and business really wanted it, they don't back out, right? So in those situations, what we did was understand their business process, right? We always look at how do I code, how do we configure, how do we do this, right? But a lot of times, you just ask the right questions to the business teams, and the process they follow for the whole pipeline in the content creation to the content publishing, right? So a lot of times what we observed was that with minimal tweaks to the process itself from the business side, really solve a lot of these problems, meaning the complex requirement becomes very simple requirement when you just make minor tweaks to your overall business process. Then when the requirement becomes simple, then it is easy to implement or use out-of-the-box tools that are available, so that we don't have to really customize the product, right? That actually really helped us in terms of when we set up the governance for the producers team on our side, they came up with like 25, 50 steps workflow. Oh, I need to get this, I need to approve, I need to get the approval from this, or somebody needs to review it, somebody has to do something else. I said, you want to deliver this content quickly, and with 55 manual steps, it never gets out the door. You need to understand. I know governance is important, this is strategic content, but you need to weigh in and find a sweet spot there where you can have best of both worlds, right? So with a lot of times, the process they follow, I'm not kind of criticizing or doing anything, but they are used to the process, right? Unless somebody tells, hey, you can tweak this process to make it even better, right? So that's where the relationship and trust come into picture. So we were able to convince quite a few occasions to tweak their process so that we can be within our team guidelines and product guidelines to implement the solutions out of the box or minimal customizations. And one other thing we did another is that when it is really required a customization to the product, we kind of do it because that is business critical at that point of time, and we always keep track of those items to see whether those features are offered in the future product roadmap or whatever, and revisit on a periodic basis to see, hey, first, does business really use it? Because sometimes some features are needed at that point of time, and it was never used after 6 months or a year, right? So if it is not used, it's easy to decommission, right? And at the same time, looking at the product roadmaps and features, we can say, oh, it is coming out of the box in version XYZ. So you take advantage of the out-of-the-box tools and then just retire this custom solution.
So just very quickly here in the little bit of time we have left, maybe I would love to know, so speaking of roadmaps, so you're doing these amazing things, right? I've had the privilege of visiting one of the Disney parks, and it's unbelievable the amount of content and kiosks and smart TVs and in the park and online and email, and that whole experience is just unbelievable. what are you guys thinking about? Like, what is the future, that you're thinking about in the immediate future? Maybe just take 30 seconds and talk to that.
Yeah. So as we all talk about, the content is very dynamic and very personalized today. It is all content-driven experiences that we are talking about, and Disney is no less. It's all immersive experience that we wanted to provide to our guests, right? So a few other things that we did were like, as I mentioned in my previous note, resort room experience. Like when the guest enters into the room, how cool would that be? Having a personalized greeting at the same time, having the party's itinerary, plans for the day, whether he has any fast passes, whether he has any photo passes, where is that family is going to dine in, where are they going to do the shopping. How cool would that be, providing all that information in the room in the language they speak, right? It's very immersive. Like, I'm not native to USA, so if I see something very personal to me in my language anywhere, that would be more exciting than anything else. It is priceless, right? So, and at the same time, we see a lot of times the guests stay in the line for any attractions, right? Minimum 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 50 minutes, whatever it takes based on the day and time. And how do you keep the guests engaged, right? We don't want to get them bored and frustrated, when they are in the line. So we are really releasing some of the play apps on the phone so that they are more engaged and immersive, and then spend time versus just staying in the line. And one of those is like Play app, which was released a few months ago or last year, which is really doing well. We have got very good feedback on it. And at the same time, as we all know, augmented and virtual reality is the future, and we are no different. Disney is well positioned and exploring all the available avenues to get into this, to enhance the guest experiences in those areas as well.
Thank you so very, very much for this.
Thank you.
Everybody, join me thanking Viru for that. I'm Robert Rose. Thank you so very, very much for your attention this morning. I hope you have a great day at the conference, and we'll see you soon.